No one noticed when 8-year-old Riley Grant stepped into the dusty auto shop wearing gloves too big for her hands and her father's cab hat slipping over her eyes. She looked far too small to hold a wrench, let alone fix a Navy SEAL's broken-down truck. But when Commander Blake Riker saw what she did next, his hands that had once defused bombs and steadied rifles, began to shake. He had faced war zones, but nothing prepared him for Riley. What she touched worked. What he said after changed her life forever. The midday sun blazed through the garage windows, casting sharp shadows over oil-stained concrete. The air was thick with the scent of gasoline, sweat, and hot metal. Customers came and went. Mechanics barked instructions. But one armored navy blue truck sat untouched. A military-grade beast with plates that hinted at secrets and scars. The engine had died hard, and even the senior techs avoided it. That was when Riley appeared, dragging a red toolbox almost as large as she was. Her father, Hank Grant, a seasoned mechanic with oil ingrained into his skin like second nature, stood nearby, rubbing his temples in frustration. No one noticed Riley at first, until she crouched beneath the hood. Ding. Commander Blake Riker had returned from the waiting room, his patience running thin. He had already been told the repairs might take days. Now, a child in boots 3 sizes too big was digging into his engine. His arms crossed, expression unreadable, but there was the faintest flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Riley didn't flinch. Her brow furrowed, her lips pressed tight. She had grown up in this garage. While other kids played with dolls and video games, she memorized tool names, listened to carburetors cough, and learned the rhythms of combustion and failure. No one had taught her formally. She watched. She absorbed. She listened to the language of machines. Riley's small, gloved fingers traced a wire harness with surgical precision. The diagnostics computer blinked beside her, useless. Hank muttered defensively when Reich shot him a questioning glance. She knows what she's doing. A beat later, Riley spoke, clear and calm. The ECM module is loose. The harness is misfiring, triggering a false ignition fail. She reached into her toolbox, grabbed a torque wrench, and made 3 precise adjustments. The engine sparked once, twice, then roared to life with a deep, thunderous growl. Silence crashed over the garage like a wave. Tools froze in midair. A customer dropped his coffee. Even Blake Riker, who had seen missiles launch and submarines dive, stood frozen. He stepped forward slowly, voice tight. "Who taught you that?" Riley wiped her forehead with the back of her glove and replied simply, "Nobody, I just listen. Engines speak. If you know how to hear them." Blake said nothing for a long moment, but the smirk that had hovered on his lips earlier was gone. His eyes narrowed, calculating. Then he turned to Hank. "You might want to get her a passport." Hank blinked, confused. "What for?" Blake's voice was low. "Because I'm taking her somewhere no one will ever laugh at her again." The next morning, the sun was barely up when a black SUV with government plates pulled into the Grant's modest driveway. Riley was still in her pajamas, eating cereal at the kitchen table, when her father opened the door. 2 uniformed men stood at attention. Behind them, Blake Riker stepped out, silent but commanding. He gave Hank a nod, then looked past him, straight to the little girl inside. "May we come in?" Blake asked, though it wasn't truly a question. Hank stepped aside, heart thudding. Riley paused mid-spoonful, her gaze flicking between the men and her father. Inside, Blake laid a folder on the kitchen table and slid it forward. Riley stared at the golden emblem embossed on the cover. Department of Naval Innovation and Engineering. Hank opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was not a job offer, not an internship. A placement. An invitation for Riley Grant, age 8, to join a classified mentorship program for elite engineering prodigies. Fully funded, travel, housing, security, even a stipend. "She's just a kid," Hank whispered, not in protest but disbelief. Blake nodded. So were Mozart, Edison, Newton. The difference is, they weren't fixing combat-grade ignition systems before their 9th birthday. What she did yesterday, no grown engineer we contacted could replicate it. Riley looked down at her bowl. She hadn't meant to be brilliant. She just wanted to help. Just wanted to be like her dad. Why her? Hank asked softly. Why not someone older? Blake leaned in, his voice dropping. Because the world is changing, and the ones who will fix it aren't always who we expect. She doesn't need years of unlearning. She's pure instinct, raw brilliance, that kind of mind. We don't mold it. We protect it. The room fell quiet. Riley's cereal went soggy. Hank finally stood straight. If this hurts her, it ends. Blake nodded with respect. Then come with her. One guardian is allowed. You'll have full access. Riley looked between them. Her voice was small, but steady. Can I still use my own tools? For the first time, Blake smiled. You can bring your whole box. That evening, while most families watched baseball and ate dinner, a private jet waited on a hidden airstrip. Riley sat near the window, toolbox on her lap, Hank beside her, silent, stunned. She didn't cry, she didn't fidget. She just stared out the window, eyes locked on the clouds, as if she already saw a world no one else had imagined. The engines of the plane roared, louder than the one she'd fixed. And just like that, Riley Grant left behind the life she knew. Not as a mechanic daughter, but as something far more dangerous. The base was nothing like Riley had imagined. It wasn't gray or cold or filled with shouting soldiers. Instead, it resembled a sleek, futuristic town tucked into a quiet mountain valley. Its buildings crafted from dark glass and titanium, curved and seamless like something drawn from a dream. The silence hung thick in the air, not empty but alive, as if every surface was quietly watching, listening. Hank walked beside her, his eyes wary, scanning every edge and corner. He had spent his whole life fixing what was broken, but this place felt like it had never broken. And that made him uneasy. They were greeted by a tall woman in a tailored navy blue coat, Dr. Evelyn Shaw. She wasn't military. She was the civilian director of the Applied Genius Unit, a top-secret think tank operating under the Department of Defense. Riley didn't understand all that, but she understood how Dr. Shaw looked at her. Not as a child, not as a science experiment, but as something rarer. An equal. Riley was given her own lab space, a room larger than their entire house. The walls glowed softly when she neared, lighting up with schematics of engines she had never seen, systems years ahead of public release. Every surface responded to her voice. The technology was breathtaking, but she didn't flinch. She didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt at home. Over the following weeks, Riley was not treated like a prodigy. She was treated like a partner. Each morning began with a level 4 security clearance, followed by debriefings from engineers twice her age and 4 times her education. They would explain their systems, then they would hand them to Riley. And wait. At first, her improvements were modest, small corrections in circuitry, subtle tweaks to thermal regulation. But within 10 days, she had redesigned a cooling interface that cut processing heat by 40%. Within 2 weeks, she created a hybrid ignition pulse no one could replicate, even after studying her code. Hank watched all of it, pride growing in his chest like fire, shadowed by a deepening fear. The more she excelled, the more he worried. How much brilliance could the world take from her before it tried to take everything? He stayed close, a guardian in plain sight. But the truth was undeniable. She had entered a world he couldn't follow. Not really. Then came the visit that changed everything. One evening, Riley was called into a secure conference room. Waiting inside were 3 men in military uniform and 1 civilian in a crisp suit. The civilian introduced himself as a representative from a major defense contractor. He smiled too much, spoke too fast, promised too many things. He slid a business card across the table. despite Riley not owning a phone. When she didn't respond, he turned to Hank instead. "She could be the face of a generation," the man said. "Public appearances, interviews, global stages. Imagine the message. Your daughter, the future of national security. Think about it." "I am thinking," Hank said, not smiling. "And the answer's no." But the man kept pushing, eager and rehearsed. "You don't understand how powerful her story is." Before Hank could answer again, Riley's voice broke the tension. "I didn't come here to be a story," she said quietly. "I came to fix what's broken." Silence swept through the room. That night, Dr. Shaw met them in private. She apologized, personally. "That will never happen again," she promised. "She is not a brand. She is a builder, not a billboard." And just like that, Riley returned to her work. Not as a poster child, but as a partner. Not a symbol, a solution. Then came the sirens. They cut through the stillness of the base like a blade. Sharp, jarring, red lights pulsing across the walls of her lab. Riley dropped her wrench. Her heart raced. Hank came sprinting through the door seconds later, his breath sharp, his eyes wild. A voice echoed over the intercom. It was Dr. Shaw. Her tone was even, controlled, but the words beneath it were trembling. "All personnel, report to the command wing. Level 5 override. Priority 1. They had never heard that phrase before, not once. Security officers met them in the hallway and escorted them to a command center shaped like a crescent moon, its walls lined with glowing monitors. On the central screen, a live satellite feed. A naval transport vessel carrying encrypted cargo through hostile waters had lost power mid-mission. It was adrift, vulnerable. Its propulsion system, built just months earlier, had completely failed. It was Riley's design. The room was tense, pulsing with urgency. An officer spoke harshly. "She's just a kid." "She's the only one who understands the core structure at a molecular level," Dr. Shaw replied without hesitation. "You want the ship saved? Let her work." Riley stood frozen, hands trembling. Words swirled around her like a storm. Mission risk, AI overrides, potential breach timelines. But all she could see was the schematic on the screen. Her mind cut through the noise. She saw the flaw, the slip, the temperature offset by 0.02 degrees, the chain reaction it triggered. "It's a cascade," she whispered. No one heard her. She said it louder. "It's a cascade failure. The AI override is locking it out. It thinks it's protecting the ship, but it's shutting it down instead." Silence dropped like a stone. Dr. Shaw turned sharply. "Can you write a patch?" "I already have it," Riley said. "It's in my head." They rushed her to the override station. Within minutes, her fingers were dancing over the keyboard, lines of code flowing like water. Hank stood just behind her, one hand on her shoulder, his breath caught in his throat. The screen shifted. System failures blinked yellow, then green. Thousands of miles away, the ship shuddered and powered back online. Applause erupted through the room. Engineers stared in disbelief. But Riley didn't smile. She leaned back in her chair, breathing hard, eyes clouded not with pride, but something heavier. Responsibility. Dr. Shaw knelt beside her, voice soft but clear. "You just saved 26 lives, Riley. Do you understand that?" Riley nodded slowly. "They'll come back, won't they? More problems, more things to fix." "Yes," Dr. Shaw said. "But now the world knows who to call." A week later, Riley and Hank returned home. There were cameras at the airport, flashing lights, people holding signs. Riley kept her head down, toolbox in hand. She didn't want fame. She didn't want glory. She just wanted to build, to heal, to fix. Back at the garage, the tools hadn't moved. The smell of rust and old oil still filled the air. Hank handed her a spark plug and smiled. Ready to get back to basics? Riley held it carefully in both hands. She looked around the familiar space and nodded. Let's fix something no one's watching. But across the world, they were watching. Quietly, respectfully. Because the girl who once listened to engines had become the one who saved them. And in doing so, she shattered every rule ever written about genius. What it looks like, what it sounds like, and how old it's allowed to be. Part 4 ends here, and with it, Riley Grant's story truly begins. From the dust of a small-town garage to the center of global defense, she proved that greatness doesn't wait for permission. And that brilliance, when paired with heart, can move mountains, save ships, and rewrite what the future dares to believe. This wasn't just a story. It was a spark. One that's still burning.